Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's sharp 4, and I think we start today's webinar. And yeah, a big welcome to everyone here today. And I'm Dr. VASAVVI Acharya, the founder chairperson, Early Child Development Forum. And today we are here with another webinar on a very, very pertinent topic. And today's topic is child abuse and neglect, understanding mandated reporting and strategies to support abused children. And today we are joined here with a panel of eminent speakers joining us from all over the globe. We have Bharti Patel. She is a child rights and social justice advocate, and she was a CEO at Every Child Protect Against Trafficking, ECPAT UK. And she's also a member of the Independent Commission on Good Governance in Public Services. A big welcome to Bharti.
Thank you.
She's joining us all the way from UK. And we have with us Ashika Shetty. She's a child rights worker advocating for body autonomy and gender inclusivity. She is a member of Child Welfare Committee, Bengaluru, Urban Department of Women and Child Development, Government of Karnataka. Welcome, Ashika.
Thank you, Dr. VASAVVI.
And we have here with joining us all the way from Pakistan. He is based out of Malaysia, but now he's, due to the lockdown, he's stuck in Pakistan. Mr. Asif Ali, and he works with traumatized and marginalized children, youths, and he advocates peace and different aspects related to youth and women empowerment. He has been a keynote speaker in many of the organizations that invite him for advocating child rights, youth, and women empowerment issues. A big welcome to you, Mr. Asif.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Doctor.
So we go right ahead with today's topic. And today we have taken a very, very huge topic in terms of the content that is there. But then we are trying to, kind of address a few of the core issues. And my first question to Mr. Asif is, when we talk about understanding mandated reporting, what kind of reporting mechanism can help to assess children at risk in a specific culture? Mr. Asif.
Thank you, Dr. VASAVVI, for your kind invitation to talk about the child abuse and the reporting mechanism which can help to support or to provide the legal or justice in a specific culture or in a specific environment. When we are talking about the child abuse or the children who are at risk of the abuse, neglect, or being an abandoned in a specific culture, there are always, we are concerning with mandatory reporting of such children. What is the mandatory reporting that is referred to the protection of the children? It is directly related to the state laws and the policies, which mandate certain agencies or the professionals to report actual or suspected child abuse and form of violence. When the child comes in contact with the abuser, particularly offended by the abuser, so there is always like a traumatic response on both of the offenders and the abused one. So when child is abused in a specific culture, there is always the response of the traumatic response of the child behavior, which sometimes like reveal it into the particulars for particular time, or maybe to to expose to the some family members, or maybe to the even the strangers. So for that, protection from exploitations that can be sexual exploitation or abuse, there are policies that typically include mandatory reporting. And such reporting of sexual exploitation and abuse allegedly committed by the strangers, by the humanitarian actors, or can anyone, even the family members. So all such actors particularly, and the service providers must have a strong, thorough understanding of local, national, and international mandatory organizational mandatory reporting system. So if the people, the parties, or the stakeholders who are involved to working on the child abuse, particularly who are at risk in a specific culture, they must know the standard children's. Because if you access without a proper reporting, without proper mechanism, that can harm the child, can easily harm the child, and it can be traumatic. Every child which is abused in past, or even the molested one, can be traumatic. So all children in contact with formal or informal justice system are treated in a child-friendly, non-discriminatory manner in line with international norms and standards, and receive services tailored to their needs and the best. So there are some key key standards which are involved in reporting mechanism, which I want to share with my audience. Safe, user-friendly reporting and referral pathways. So how? Because if you never consider the safe or user-friendly reporting mechanism, there will always be misleading information to the stakeholders. So the agencies cannot cope with the issues properly on the child abuse cases. Second one, community training on where and how to report or prevent incidents. If the community, they don't have a proper training about the child abuse cases, particularly those where the children is abused, so they can like mislead the child case, particularly the abuse one. The third one, safe, timely, and ethical responses to report or maltreatment committed by like by even the teachers, the caregivers, the strangers, the family members, anyone, even the students. The third one, community awareness of relevant codes of conduct. There is always code of conduct related with a particular culture. Like, for example, I have one example for that. Like in South Asian culture, it's always warm culture. Like we are warm-hearted people. We always contact with children, like to hug or to kiss. Like it's normal in our culture. Like, but in a specific culture, sometimes it's not considering as a good approach to the children. Their parents, their caregivers, they, or even the strangers, they don't feel safe about the children when you approach the children. Even if that is for good reason, but you cannot approach like that to hug or to touch the private parts of the child, or even the normal kiss one. So these standards are particularly are intended to all humanitarian actors, particularly those who work in child protection or directly with children, families, and communities. So this include community groups, non-governmental organizations, government, personal policymakers, anyone, even the advocate, the media people, social media users, that how you will report the cases of the child abuse in a particular culture. Like, for example, there is always sensitivity when like the case is involved with religious people. So how you will approach it, that the child is abused in a particular place which is related with some kind of institutions or religious institutions, or like schools or residential cares. So how you will approach to that? There is always ethical standards. You cannot directly report the child case to the agencies without following the code of the conduct of that specific culture. We have so many cases, like for example, we have like a lack of developing a system to monitor the quality and effectiveness of the service provides. For example, if there are agencies who are working on the child abuse cases, these agencies, how they work on it, like how they are figuring out the cases. They have a proper statistical data. They have the proper lawyer system, like the justice system is involved or not, like the case is reported to the police or not. This one. The third one is like the agencies, how it's making to report to the higher authorities, to the stakeholders, and how they are taking care of the child. Because if the child is abused, already abused, so how they can providing the psychosocial support or other caregiving to the particular case or the child who already abused in that specific culture. So these are all parameters which we are looking in always in reporting mechanism. I can say that there is a standard of minimum standard for child protection. So every advocate, every child rights activist, every social worker, psychologist, or even the volunteer social workers who don't have any particular trainings, they should follow the proper mechanism for the reporting to address the child abuse cases in a specific culture. Sometimes, like, we don't have knowledge about the local culture, like how to communicate with the child, which don't understand the like very complex meanings of the child abuses. Like for example, if you are discussing the sexual abuse cases, case with the children who already abused, so you cannot use those words who can harm the child. Like, we should also have to consider the confidentiality, accountability, and do not harm principles. These are the specific three standard when you are working on the child abuse cases.
Thank you so much.
There are
You're continuing on this? Yes, yes, sure, please.
Actually, I want to mention in the last that when you implement such standard, there is always like a way for the feedback. So the standard without feedback cannot work very well. That's what I want to say.
Yes. Yeah. Just a moment. Am I audible? So, Mr. Asif?
Yes.
Right. Yes, 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 fine. So I understood from the, the question that you had answered in the reporting mechanism, basically, there has to be proper community training, the timely reporting, awareness, and I think the capacity building of the people who are managing children, who are traumatized, counseling them, handling them in the right way is essential while the cases go on reporting, and how you handle these children who are probably, who have gone through a lot. So coming to Ms. Akshika, how do we create a, a referral mechanism and preparedness to support abused children with the help of the Maslow hierarchy needs, basically? So,
thank you for that, Dr. Vasavvi, and thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak among an eminent panel like this. I would like to refer to these children, or to children as children who have faced abuse and faced harm, and not abused children, for the simple reason that they are beyond what they have experienced and have gone through in their lives. So I'll use the first person language, which is children who faced harm, faced abuse. I would like to thank Mr. Asif for having elaborated how serious this issue of children who faced harm and faced abuses, and had brought in the whole concept and how the gravity of the situation. Now, all of us here as adults are very keen to support children and ensure that whatever mechanisms are there to support children who faced harm or abuse is in their best interest. Now, this whole concept of their best interest is very, very perceptive and very, very relative. So, because all of us have the right intention and believe that what we are doing for children is in their best interest, but is it? And do we have a universal language for what best interest of child really is? So I would like to share a few of my thoughts on this. The best interest of the child. Now, for any kind of reporting or mechanism to enable children to bring them out of the situation that they're in, we need to look at things in their perspective. Now, how do we do that? And what document helps us do this? All of us are very familiar with the UNCRC, United Nations Conventions of the Rights of the Child, which Dr. Bhatti will probably elaborate and share with you. But what I would like to share is that the UNCRC, that has been ratified by most countries in the world, has very clearly articulated what best interest of the child is. These are the elements that have been taken into account when assessing the child's best interest. And this has been articulated clearly in the general comment number 14 on the right of the child to have his, her, or her own best interest taken as a primary consideration. The first thing that we need to keep in mind is the child's views. Now, it's very often we adults feel that we know what is best for the child because of our experiences through life. However, we seem to forget sometimes the pain, the gravity of the situation, and how it has impacted the child because we are now adults. To give you a simple example, there was this organization I was working in, the Concern for Working Children, was working in the Gram Panchayat, where children along with adults were looking at allocation of funds. And what happened was they were trying to see if they needed to build a bridge across a particular stream. The adults felt that the stream was not too deep and the water just came up to their knees. But a little child raised her hand and she said, "Sir, it may have reached your knees, but it reaches my head." So we don't realize how the intensity of these issues weigh on these children, and therefore it is very vital for us to listen and hear what children have to say about what they have been going through and what they have and they want. The next thing that we need to keep in mind is the child's identity. When we say identity, a very quick example I'd like to give you is my spouse whose roots is from Kerala, and whenever we are out, and he's born and brought up in another state called Karnataka, and when we move around and when we hear somebody speak in the native language of Kerala, which is Malayalam, he'd quickly run up to them and says, "Malayali ano." So what does that mean is, are you Malayali? And that is a sense of bonding. And children also go through that same kind of bonding when they hear somebody speak the language that they belong to, the culture, the race, the ethnicity, the social demography. So all these things form part of what is a child's identity. And when we adults form any kind of redressal mechanisms, we need to keep and ensure that the child's identity is secured and it is preserved. The next thing is preservation of the family environment and maintaining relations. Now, all of us have moved to different spaces for work and accessing whatever that we need out of life. And many of us during festivals and any social functions like to pack our bags and go back, what we say, home, where we meet our family and we meet our social spaces and celebrate together. Another example would be the recent pandemic that we're all experiencing right now, and the entire exodus that the migrant community has been taking on to go back what they call as home. Which is, what does it mean? It means that for them, what values is that the family, maintaining of relationships. And that is why we travel, go back and reconnect with our roots, reconnect with members who we feel as family. And it is so important that redressal mechanisms keep this in mind, even with children, because for children, it is so important to be in touch with family, extended family, the culture that they're part of, the social spaces that they're part of, the community that they're part of. Very important aspect is care, protection, and safety of the child. Yes, redressal mechanisms have to keep this in mind. And there's a lot of emphasis on this. State, non-profit, civil society initiatives all gather together and ensure this and take a lot of interest in ensuring care, protection, and safety of the child. But to what extent do we do it? Do we go ahead and shout slogans saying, kill the rapist? Do we ask for stringent punitive measures? Are these measures going to help this child in the long run? Have anybody asked these children, what is it that you need as redressal mechanism? What is it that you think is safety for your child? Trust me, most children say that, help me stop this, what's going on in my life, help me forget it, help me move on. And redressal mechanisms need to keep these aspects in mind. Now, situation of vulnerability also is a very crucial aspect. We need to understand what the spaces that these children are coming from. Is a trauma that they've been through a natural calamity or armed conflict, or something very closed and personal and very violent as incest. So these are spaces that we need to understand where the children are coming from if we need to ensure that our redressal mechanisms is working well. The child's right to health. Now, this is something all of us take it very seriously as adults. We know and definitely feel very strongly about this, and timely medical intervention is one of the crucial aspects when it comes to children who face trauma and abuse. I'd like to bring a special focus on children who face sexual violence and are opting for medical termination of pregnancy for the same. Now, most often adults think that they need to take that decision, but sometimes it's very, very important to understand from the child's perspective what they want to do in these spaces. So redressal mechanisms need to understand the child's right to health from the child's perspective. The final thing that I would like to say is the child's right to education. Now, for a child to move on in life, to be able to get back to the community that the child is part of, to reintegrate, to continue to live life in a more fulfilled manner, education plays a crucial role. But what part of education is so crucial? Is it so crucial that we put them through English medium of education? Is it very crucial that we put them through an international school? Is it very crucial that we put them in spaces and say that what is available or what has been provided by the government is not so suitable for these children? I'd like to quote, I wouldn't say quote, I'd like to refer to something that one of my very closest friends, who's a very eminent psychologist and an education inclusion specialist, Dr. DISIASTER, who always says, just imagine you are learning a foreign language, a language that you have never heard before. And you've put in a lot of effort to learn this. And after that, start learning something as very complex as, say, nuclear physics in that language. Imagine how tough that is for you. It is that much more difficult for a child. So when we provide access to education for children, we need to understand that it needs to be from the learning abilities of the child and the strengths of the child. If it means that the child accesses open schooling, so be it. If it means the child has to access vocational training, so be it. If it means the child has to access alternate forms of education, so be it. And why not conventional government systems? Because they teach children in a language that these children mostly understand. Now, how does this all bind together to Maslow's hierarchy of needs? And for some of you who do not know what it is, it's Maslow was a psychologist who kind of demarcated needs in a tier form, in a pyramid, and has put it in the form as shown in the slide. Now, if you notice that most initiatives by government, state, and nonprofits lie in the first two basic needs, that is physiological needs and safety needs. Now, where do we want our children to be? To be able to accomplish their esteem needs, to be able to reach self-actualization. And belongingness and loving needs is so crucial here. And I think the best interest of the child, articulated by UNCRC, very clearly highlights how important intimate relationships are, friends are, bonding, social, culture, and it's preserving the heritage of where this child belongs to. So I would like to share mechanisms to support children who face violence through an example of a case that had come before the committee that I'm part of. This was a child who was rescued based on an anonymous tip under the ITPA Act, which is a trafficking, illegal trafficking of persons act, where the child's mother was soliciting the child for sex work along with their 4 siblings. Now, this child was brought before a quasi-judicial body in India, and the child was asked what the child needs. Now, unfortunately, the child had crossed 17 years and had not accessed education at all, and was very vulnerable, very scared, and wanted to do something with their life. Now, this child requested for vocational training. Now, we understood that the child cannot go back to a home per se because of the vulnerability that the child was facing, and the child needed to be with their siblings. And therefore, what the committee decided was to provide needs with very minimal institutionalization. Institutionalization is something that is very common mode of rehabilitation that is used, but this needs to be used in a very sensitive manner, and that's what the committee did here. What they did was place this child along with their siblings so that they are in touch with family, and also they are able to access what they want to, which is vocational training. Also, what the committee did was reach out and try and find where the child's family, extended family was, and was able to get in touch with the child's estranged father. And therefore, the child father kept meeting the child and their siblings, and rehabilitation happened in a very conducive and collaborative manner. The child completed accessing vocational training and decided when they turned 18 to step out and live a life on their own. Now, the institution that this child was part of supported the child's intentions and helped the child access a job, helped the child open a bank account, and with the savings that the child found, helped the child find a home, and the child and their father decided to live together. And this is what I say is reintegration. So the child's voice was heard, the child's decision was taken into consideration, and support was provided. Now, the child was also allowed to, the child was actually placed in an institution that primarily followed a Hindu methodology of prayer and worship, but the child was given access to pray because the child belonged to a Muslim identity and also followed Islam, and was given all the privileges and the support to continue to follow their customs and traditions, and also kept visiting home during festivals. Now, also what we realized is that once a child reintegrated, the child continued to keep in touch with siblings, so that the siblings who are still accessing institutional care has the loving and bonding of the sibling now, as well as the father. Now, this I think I would propose as mechanisms to support children who face abuse. If you notice, I have not made any mention of the gender of the child, because children of all genders face equal, same amount of abuse, same amount of trauma, and same amount of vulnerability. And therefore, interventions also need to be holistic and universal. I would therefore want to conclude by saying that, sharing an African proverb saying that it takes a village to bring up a child. And therefore, all of us need to get together and help the child voice their needs and desires and move them towards rehabilitation in the manner they seek. Thank you.
Absolutely, Ashika, very, very beautifully put. And yes, we would always, look at empowering children to actually advocate their own rights, to the extent that they have a voice in saying what they would want and what they want to do in their lives, right?
Yes.
So coming to Ms. Bharti, Ashika also mentioned the UNCRC. Bharti, how do you think stakeholders perceive the understanding and implementation of the UNCRC articles? You are muted, Bharti.
I've come on. Thank you so much. I have a slide which I'd like to share with you. So if I can just put that on now, and then we can take it from there. Okay, so here's the PowerPoint. bear with me for a second. Okay, that one. Bear with me for a second. I know you guys can see me. I can't see you. Okay, I'm having some technical issues. I'll be with you very soon. Right, shall I?
Bharti, your slide actually is visible. You just need to make it full screen. Yes.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Dr. VASAVVI and my fellow panelists. Can you hear me?
The two screens.
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Okay, is there a problem?
It's a little small, but then yes, I think we'll be able to
see it
to some extent. Yes, but that's okay. I think you can go on.
Yeah, I think okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
That's
yes,
much better.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you so much for this invitation. It's greatly appreciated. What the other speakers have highlighted is very kind of practically what's happening on the ground. And I think this is very important because it is what happens on the ground that needs to be then changed. And the change can happen in several ways. I think as Ashika said, it happens with individuals, the families, the village, communities coming together. But to achieve a much more broader and a global change, what I think is important is looking at where the regulatory framework lies. Who has what responsibility and how they are executing that responsibility. So that's the kind of broad overview that I'm going to give. We've talked about the UNCRC. Ashika gave very good examples of some of the articles in that and how those articles should be applied. But let's just recap. This is a legally binding international treaty. It's got about 58 articles, which sets up the civil, the political, the economic rights of the child, including the cultural rights, which is their identity and their right to live a life according to their culture. I think you set a good example of the individual who was allowed to practice his religion. The government has a clear responsibility, and I think that's often not, governments are often not held accountable, particularly in countries where rule of law is probably weak. So they've got to make sure that they've got the measures in place that protect children from the kind of abuse that we've been talking about, violence, sexual abuse, neglecting children, not meeting children's basic needs of education, clean water. I can quote statistics, but I'm not going to at the moment. Ashika also talked about the best interest of child. This has got to be the top priority, which means any decisions that are taken needs to be ensured that it is in the best interest of the child. Now that could be that we think it's in the best interest, maybe different to what the child thinks it's in best interest. Again, Ashika talked about the duties, not just, but the duties of parents and the guardians and anyone that has a responsibility to care for the child. That needs to be part of this. And yet, here is some data. Millions of children across the globe fail to access their fundamental rights, healthcare. They are not free from hunger. Basically, their rights remain a distant dream. Many remain malnourished, they're neglected, they're sexually, mentally abused and forced into labor. Last year, 1 billion children have experienced physical, sexual and emotional violence or neglect. That's 1 billion. These are not small numbers. And nations continue to breach their legal duty with impunity. I see very little change. We've seen large numbers of children continuing to be abused. Ashika, we talked about the child rights. I'm presenting something about the child rights. You and I know about child rights. I think a lot of the people on the audience will know about child rights, but it's not universally known. And I think here lies the big problem when we talk about implementation. The availability and accessibility of good quality information about children's rights remains poor. This is one of the survey that was done in a borough in London. 46% of the children said they had not even heard about CARC. A further 10% weren't even sure about it, yeah? Those that reported that they had been taught about rights, they were still very unclear about what they really mean in practice to them. And the barriers to learning about their rights is basically right now, it doesn't exist in the school curriculum. Particularly in private schools, in free schools, they're not obliged to teach pupils about their convention. If children don't know about what their rights are, it makes it difficult to voice their needs, their concerns. So implementation becomes that much of a problem. What the state parties need to do is they have to make sure that there is appropriate legislative, administrative, other measures. They need to make sure that the content of that conversation is widely known to children as well as adults, not just NGOs, not just the policy makers in various parliaments. And then they've got to make sure that reports are widely available. Now, the NGOs do a great job on this. The NGOs make sure that the reports are read. They make sure that they highlight key issues, particularly key negative issues that the government is not doing. And this gets into the press. Press is then widely available. The social media is helping us do that. So that's important. But again, the onus is on the onus becomes on the NGO, on the activists to put it out there. State must make sure that they are reviewing their national legislation to ensure that they are compatible with the rights of the CRC. I find that they may be as far as law is concerned, but when it comes to implementation, it's definitely not the case. The enforcement of CRC as well as national legislation continues to be quite weak. I think this is not something that can be done within by a group of individuals or a particular department in government or the NGOs. It does require a cross-sectorial coordination. The rights that Ashika talked about and the kind of issues and the impact of abuse that Asif talked about crosses several departments, crosses the education department, the health department, access to water department, livelihood. So you can imagine if you work in departments work in silos, we are not going to get the kind of protection that's needed. The government must engage with the civil society. As I said, the civil society often becomes the voice. I don't think that they should be the voice for the children, but they inevitably become the voice because children are not developed enough or are not aware of their rights to be able to voice their issues. So government must work with the civil societies, but as Ashika said, make sure that children have a voice in this. There has to be a training on CRC. People are still not aware what the 58 articles are, what government responsibility there is, what international conventions, international institutions can do to help, the weaknesses in the international conventions and national legislation. We need to be able to train people on this. And that's beyond just saying these are the articles and this is what they need to know. We need to put children at the center of this. They have human rights to this there. And we need to make sure that those rights are respected and every child is treated with dignity. When a child is sexually abused, a 4-year-old being sexually abused, the child not only loses his childhood, but the child is left with very little dignity. And there is a much, much more long-term impact on the child, which then costs the society, the communities, the society, as well as governments, in terms of how do you make sure that the child recovers from this traumatic experience, and how do you rehabilitate that child so that he does grow up to become, as your organization's VASAVVI talks about, a well-rounded child who is able to then become a contributor to the society. Enforcement of those rights, if it's not going to happen on ground, we will continue to hear the cases that Asif talked about, the case that that Ashika illustrated with, that there needs to be access to just justice. Now, this is very limited in countries, in all countries, but also I would say in a country like the UK, where there is rule of law, there is much, much more accountability on the governments. But access to justice, as I understand it from countries like India, it just doesn't seem to happen. You've got a very long process. And I think here is the main issue about it. So that's the outline. What I would like to do in my second half is talk about what are those safety mechanisms that residential home in particular need, and the kind of risks that residential homes have in the abuse of children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bharti. That I think kind of gives an overall view of the UNCRC and what we need to do, provide the right linkages, how, you know, there has to be coordination to get the children in the right place and in the right manner, right? Coming to Mr. Asif, I would want to ask you how to seek an agreement with those who usually, you know, identify children at risk at the community level and those who are the first responders.
Thanks, Dr. VASAVVI. Before I want to explore the other features of the referral mechanism or the reporting mechanisms, I want to share with my audience, particularly who are directly involved with the child rights or child advocacy, and particularly who are working with agencies. Actually, when we are considering the cases of the child abuse or any kind of abuse, like sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, we should have to consider it in a microsystem. Every child has own rights. It should be treated individually. It should be treated with individual justice. The second, because the whole child abuse system is under the socio-ecological system. So those who are aware with this theory, it's like, it's not very complicated, but it should be very clear to all the peoples who are involved with the child rights or child support particularly. So we have 4 systems in this. The first is microsystem, where the child is living. That can be home, that can be institution, that can be a child on the street. The second one, we have a mesosystem. The third one, we have exosystem. And the fourth one, we have macrosystem. So these are all systems are interconnected with the child support. In the referral mechanism or in the reporting mechanism, we always seek to support the child individually. Let me give you an example, particularly in the child labor context. So when you see the child, those who are involved in labor industry or the small industries, particularly the younger children, the 10-year or the 20-year-olds, they are physically abused every day for the more like supporting to the business. This is called exploitation. This is the child is exploited. Their right is exploited in that industry and that place where the child laborers are involved. So the workers, social workers, psychologists, all those people who are involved in the child rights works, they can easily address the child in the child labor industry or the child labor market or like that. You can see that it's very common. They are involved in mechanical workshops. They are working in the shops, the small shops, the bigger shops, the malls even, and even the medical stores. You can see it's a very common experience of everyone. The second one, so when it comes to the meso and exosystem, the children are interconnected with the family members. the family members, the teachers, the schools, and the institutions, the religious institutions, the training, the sports centers particularly, where the children can be targeted by the abusers. So with these connectivities, you have to understand where the child link with these industries, with these areas. The fourth one is we call macro system. In the macro system, we call socio-cultural system. So the socio-cultural system, if a person belongs to the particular area, the worker, social worker, or any child rights activist who is working in a particular area, he is better understand this particular culture because he lived there, he born there, he understands the language of the people who are involved in these cases of the child abuse cases. So he can easily cope the child the problems. So I want to come to Dr. VASAVVI points about the seeking an agreement. Usually identity children of, yes, again, I refer my the previous talk about the standards. We should have to consider the three principles. That is, the first one is do not harm. The second one is confidentiality, and the third one is accountability. Without these principles, I think we can easily harm the child life. And there is an example I want to share. I think Ms. Bharti already aware about that in the Western culture, where the adults are sharing their abuse experience with the agencies. That what happened when they were child, when they were abused. So from that point of the experience, we can really figure out the problems of the child abuse. The first responders, those who are involved, like particularly the social workers who are directly involved in the child rights on the child abuse cases, I have to say about that those people who are directly working with the child abuse cases, they should have to consider the ethics of the child, the ethics of the work of the child rights. That's why we have CRC. That's why we have articles. Before working on the child abuse cases, you have to understand the child rights in CRC context. And again, I come to Ashika, which very well defined about the problems comes around the children in the particular culture. That in that case, we should have to look around the child, the integration particularly, that is very much important. If child is not properly integrated with the society, he can be the future traumatic person. He can be a traumatic adult later in his life. He can abuse, like have seen in Malaysia, in Pakistan, that those who are sexually abused in their childhood, they are in cycle to abuse the children in their adulthood. So we should have to understand these the parameters, the principles of the child abuse cases. The first responder, again, I'm coming to the first responder who are working in community. Children live in communities. That is a very simple phenomenon because they are not outside of the community's sphere. So if the child live in the communities, he is directly at risk of the abuse. He can be abused, he can be bullied in the school, he can be abused in the family members, he can be abused by the strangers, by the teachers. Even sometimes, like I have seen these cases, even the parents, they abuse their own children. So in such cases, what we should have to do, we should have to the proper mechanism, like the hotline system. I don't know about the India, but being a very largely populated country, definitely there are hotline systems that they provide the instant access to the responders, that how they can provide the justice or the psychosocial support for further support of the children. So the hotline system, most of the time, these hotlines numbers or the system or the websites or even the social media is helping a lot to solve the problems of the child abuse. These are these hotline provide can easy access to the child rights particularly. The second one, how the people, they can aware about these hotline system. We, unfortunately, that I want to say here in particularly in developing countries, the literacy about the child right is very much undermined. We don't have a proper education system. We don't have a child rights education system in schools, that the teacher should be properly trained about the child abuse cases, because the child can be abused anywhere, either in a school, in institutions, or in home. So the teacher should provide the child sexual education to the children, that how they can understand what is the child abuse, what is the physical abuse, what is bullying, and what is emotional abuse. If child can understand all such these things, like in Western countries, they have at least, they have a good reporting mechanism. They have good, like providing the sexual education to the children about awareness of their own rights. So like what Ms. Bharti said, is very well explained about the child rights, and it should be participatory. Child should be participated in their own problems. Like they should have to share their own problem with the stakeholders, with the people those are involved. Unfortunately, I want to say again, we have lack of the clinical social workers. We have lack of the clinical psychologists who can work with, like, to display the rights in every institutions with proper CRC articles, and properly in the law and the justice, because there is always penalties, there is always code of ethics described by the government to the masses. Thank you so much.
Right, Ms. Asif. So here we understand, yeah, the responders, they need to be extremely trained, and they need to get the child to the right place in the right time, and, you know, kind of address their problem in the right way. There has to be a lot of soft skills also involved in this entire process. A lot of counseling goes into it. Ms. Bharti, and as regards the Indian legal system, what we do, you know, what we have as a, you know, to support children, Ashika would be talking about that. But before moving on to Ashika, let me go to Ms. Bharti. Ms. Bharti, I want to understand what are the strategies to monitor and evaluate children's safe mechanism in the residential cares. You already spoke about that, and a little elaboration on that would be very helpful. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I think because these are quite technical issues that I'm going to be talking about, so I'm going to do again a quick PowerPoint presentation. If you guys can bear with me, this time it should be easy. Okay, can you see it? No.
Yeah.
You can see it, yeah. Okay, but yeah. I've got somebody helping me. Okay,
Yeah, this is fine.
Bigger. Okay, that's better. Okay, so I'm just going to go across the title. Again, I think it's good to have some data, some understanding of the scale of the problem that we're talking about. And nobody really knows the real scale, because collecting and recording the numbers of people that are in residential care, because you've got large numbers of residential care that's simply not registered, not regulated. So some figures range from about 3.2 million to 9.4 million children that are living in some form of residential care. Some of these are orphans, but many of them are not, and often placed there by parents due to their poverty, and parents feel their inability to provide that care. Parents see institutions as a means to provide education, healthcare, development needs for their children. And that's because they feel that they haven't got the resources to do it, not because they want not the children to be with them. And I think it's important to realize that it is that lack of resources and lack of social protection systems in some of the countries. Many care homes, as I said, are unregulated, meaning that the staff are poorly trained. They are recruited without background checks and are not held accountable. So monitoring and evaluating those safety standards is absolutely vital. What are we talking about when we're talking about the concerns that we have in residential care? Children living in institutionalized setting, unless they're protected or monitored effectively, are definitely at risk of negative health and development outcomes. There's ample evidence on this, ample research that's done on this. The potential for abuse is huge because many of these children are already vulnerable. They come from a background that they have seen abuse, as Asif said, often, and therefore their vulnerability is further heightened. And they are then risk to be abused physically, emotionally, mentally, and often we find that there is systemic abuse by a number of individuals. So it's not one-to-one. It's often a group of people, perhaps people in the care home themselves. And again, we've got some research on that. I'm going to come to that. Evidence, I think Asif touched on this, that evidence suggests that it is often people that the child knows and people that parents feel that the child is in safe hands. Now here lies a problem because the parents feel that they're leaving the children in a place where they are protected. But as we have seen in the past, and we continue to see, that abuse can happen by the care worker, can happen by the teacher, it can happen on the streets when the child is out there. A doctor, we have several cases of doctors that have abused children in care homes. We've got religious leaders. There are many cases right now that are exposed of children being abused by religious leaders. They've gained the trust of the child, and this is where often the abuse takes place. In the UK, there's been an amazing inquiry that was set up by the government, but it's an independent inquiry, which looked into historical as well as contemporary child sexual abuse. One particular stream of their investigation inquiry was in the residential care. In the UK, what they found, and this was with the adults that were abused in Australia, British children that were forced migrated to Australia, put in homes in Australia, and now adults, and ICSA, this is the independent inquiry, directly engaged them in their findings. And what they found very clearly is that these children were horrifically abused, sexually as well as forced into labor. They were expected to look after the great orange trees in Australia. These were when they were children. Children reported that they basically were treated as unworthy of love and care. And as I said, most of them were sexually abused and currently facing huge traumatic traumas, to a point where ICSA, the inquiry, has considered how do you ensure that they've got the resources to be able to get the care that they need in order to be rehabilitated. So there can be a kind of a financial penalty, which I think needs to be considered very clearly. Could be a deterrent, it could not be. What ICSA found is that what we need to do in care homes is to assess what the current climate is. So there is an embedded culture of abusive behavior, staff being given care of responsibilities without sufficient training, qualification or support. I think, again, Asif talked about this. There is very little supervision and professional boundaries. So you are talking about care workers often touching, as Asif talked about, children in inappropriate ways. Sometimes it's just very naive, and it's for good reasons, but cases are where they have been exploited as a result. There is a deflection when it comes to concerns or allegations. Often you don't want to know. And so any reports are often just brushed under the carpet, if I can use that term. And the children have no one that they could trust and they could talk to. One of the things that, again, the inquiry found is that children fear that they would, if they were to complain about it, that there would be retribution against them. And that they often would not be believed. Now, that still happens now. I worked with young people that have been trafficked into the UK that have told stories numerous times to the police, to the social workers, to government ministers. All of them have come back and saying, we don't believe you, this is a made up story. And because there are so many of these cases already in the media, detailed cases, people feel that it's the same story and therefore it must be made up. And I think here lies, again, the problem, because the pattern is very much there, but it's kind of used against the children. They have a right to live in a secure and caring environment. We know that it doesn't happen. There is legislation, framework, guidance, practices, identifying who are at risk of harm and taking action to protect them. Legislation exists. There's a government duty and responsibility. UNCRC is very clear. Most of that is brought into domestic legislation. And so there is a legal obligation to do this. The Care Institute and its employees also have a legal duty of care in most countries. I'm not sure about what the situation is in Pakistan, in India, and some of our audience is coming from. What we have found in the UK, this has been extremely useful, is having a children's commissioner, some kind of an ombudsman, who holds the government to account, who investigates the problem and the causes of the problem. And what we've also set up here is something called multi-agency safeguarding hub. Going back to what I was saying earlier in my last presentation, you need to work across several departments, across several issues that a child can come across with. And so a multi-sectorial, a multi-agency safeguarding hub is something that in the UK, we found it quite useful. When you're talking about setting the standards, again, it's important that we have a rights-based approach. We talked about it, so I'm not going to go into further details on that. Taking the best interest of the child, making sure it's non-discriminatory, every single child, irrespective of their religion, where they come from, their abilities, disabilities, need to make sure that their rights are respected. I think the way to make sure that the standards are effectively monitored and evaluated is you need to know what the situation is with the child when they first come to the residential home. So you need to develop clear indicators on the needs of the child, but what is often forgotten is their aspirations. I've seen that regularly. And so you might meet their basic needs, making sure they've got shelter, making sure they have got access to some form of education, they've got food being provided to them. But what is their aspirations? What do they want to do with their lives? And I think that often is not taken into account when you're doing the needs assessment. So I'm going to say this is about their creativity needs, their intellectual, physical, as well as the social interest and skills, going beyond the kind of education aspects of it. Develop a very clear plan. Again, that often doesn't happen. You meet the immediate needs, but you don't think about how these needs are going to meet the child's overall development plans. As I said, starting this, children living in institutionalized setting, unless they're adequately monitored, protected, will always be at this risk. And their development outcomes will be extremely poor. Again, having a long-term impact. The abuse is huge. I'm not going to go into that. As I think Ashika and Asif said, it's often the people that they feel safe are the ones that then end up abusing them. It's important that at the organizational level, so you've got the staff working with the children, but at the organizational level, you have a zero tolerance of abuse in that home. You have a very clear child protection policy and procedures, which is signed off at the highest level and then communicated to every single staff, including somebody who is a caretaker of the home, a cleaner of the home, a domestic help in the home, the cooks, they all need to be on the same page as far as the policy and the procedures concerned. And having something like a whistleblowing policy, so the person who has seen the risk of harm to the child is able to make a complaint without then feeling that the person there will be some form of retribution against them. A clear risk assessment of the home itself. Who's going out when, who's coming in, how long for, where are the children going to? So I think all of that needs to be risk assessed. We talked about the staff not having proper training. I think there is an important need to make sure that there is a continuous professional development. CPD is what it's known, not just at the recruitment, the training of the staff, but that the staff understand the latest regulatory framework, the guidance, whether it's from government or from other sources. I think in India, it may be from the local government level, that they understand what that is and they demonstrate the importance of those guidance. A child should be made to feel that they can turn to the workers themselves for support if they need it. At the national level, there are so much more that the governments can do. As I said, an appointment of the Children's Ombudsman, Children's Commissioner is very important, or an equivalent body. They should be independent. They should have powers to help bring out the long-term changes and improvements in the quality of the childcare that exists in the country. So they can hold the government accountable. At the national level, there needs to be a regular analysis of what are the causes that leaves a parent no choice but to put the child in a residential care. And I think here, if we're looking at the root causes of children, we need to engage with a range of stakeholders, child protection specialists, the health and education service providers, and of course, the NGOs themselves. We need to think, and I think this is the case across the world, the so-called richer nations, as well as the so-called poorer nations, there are weakness in the social protection system. We need to make sure that when we're talking about a social protection system, that it's the child's protection. It's the protection that works in the best interest of children. They are connected to the parents, and the parents are connected as part of the bigger society. So we're talking about a societal type of protection system. Care homes, they have to be regulated. In the UK, we've just learned last week that there are large numbers of care homes not regulated, and we've seen huge numbers of children that are abused in these care homes with very little protection systems. The last but not least, and I think this is quite important, is we need to hold the government account to what they've signed up as the Agenda 2030. So we've talked about the UNCRC, the MDGs happened. We know not much progress was made in that other than lifting some children out of poverty. But as far as child safety is concerned, 16.2 is very clear. And I think we need to be holding government to account to see what progress is being made when it comes to child safety standard. So making sure that they are moving towards, by 2013, that no child is abused, no child is exploited, no child is trafficked, and we're talking about all forms of violence here, and no child is tortured. That's a very emotive term to use, torture, but I think most of us working in this sector know that this is what's happening. So at a national level, there needs to be this. This is a brilliant picture. This is a photo of an article that I wrote recently, which is a residential care in a local village. These are children of migrant families. And we've heard so much about migrants leaving their villages, going into cities and towns to work on a temporary basis. They then return. But what I found here was that there was a brilliant residential care for these children. Part of it supported, sadly, by trusts and foundations, sadly by NGOs set up in foreign countries. One of the NGOs supporting this is UK-based, and they provide funds to make sure that they have adequate nutrition, that the children have a place that they can stay. These children were laughing, they were smiling, they were dancing with the facilitator who had a very good rapport with the children, and I really loved watching this. when I was watching this, I thought, it's fine. Physically, they look very happy. They know what's happening. They're enjoying it. They're getting their food. Is there something hidden in their faces that I'm not able to see? And I thought, are there mental, emotional issues that the children are not necessarily bringing out because there is this great service that's being provided to them? And I find that there is very little research done when it comes to children in residential home. The only research I found was one that was done in China. And what it found very clearly was that without the adequate protection, which includes social, emotional, physical type of protection for children, there will be a long-term impact on the child. And I think we are a long way away from understanding that impact. So monitoring, evaluating at the home is very important so that there is a much, much more longer term change that we would be looking for. I would very much welcome the audience to look at the article, and I would love to get your comments on it. The article leaves me with a lot of questions rather than saying, you know, here are the answers to what's happening. So I'd love your comments on that. Thank you very much for listening. Right, am I back in? I've finished. Dr. VASAVVI, can you hear me?
Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Yes, I can hear you, Bharti. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
we can.
you hear me? Am I audible? Yes. So, right. So after these strategies to monitor and evaluate, and we are a long way to go still, you know, in the process, because there's a lot to be done and there's a lot that is not yet done. But again, there is always a ray of hope. We are going forward towards it. And I think if everybody works together, it works, you know, in a better way. Now, coming to Ashika, I think we have, you know, kind of got, you know, the time is almost over, but I will ask you to quickly throw light on the Indian legal system, the provisions that we have to, you know, provide a safety net to children who are neglected and abused. Yes, Ashika, to you.
Thank you, Dr. Asmi. So India, I think in paper has done a lot when it comes to child rights, as it has signed and ratified the UNCRC in 1992. Which gave birth to the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection Act in 2000. It has gone through an amendment in 2005, and right now currently the amended version is 2015. One of my personally, an act that is very dear to me, because I feel all the aspects of child rights and all the articles of UNC has been beautifully encapsulated in this act. It also very strongly stands by the fact that every child under the age of 18 is a child and not treated as an adult. And it's one of the only laws in India that has the guiding principles that has been articulated in UNCRC has been put in Section 3 of the Act. Now the Juvenile Justice Act is such a powerful act, and unfortunately does not get its due, as in people are not aware that child rights is encapsulated beautifully here. The awareness, as Dr. Bhatti was very clearly showing, that there is limited awareness of the fact that children's rights are being adhered, are being respected in India, and this act is the living proof of it. Now, there are other abuses that children go through, and when children go through abuse, if there are adults involved, there needs to be some kind of a retribution, some kind of action to be taken, and therefore we have accompanying acts in order to support children who have faced abuse. The first that is written here is the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, the POCSO Act, which clearly defines that any sexual act committed against a child, irrespective of the child's gender, is considered a crime. And there are several ramifications, there are several consequences have been listed in this. There's also the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act in India, where children have access to free education till the age of 14, which the government is providing in India, but in state languages. And whenever there's violation in that, people have the right to reach out and seek support. We also, since child marriage is very rampant in developing countries, we also have the provision of Child Marriage Act, which criminalizes people who and adults who perform marriages of children where girls are below the age of 18 and boys 21. The other acts that we have is Child and Adolescent Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act, which criminalizes child labor, and also punitive action very stringently has been articulated in this act. Now, though all these acts have been clearly defined, the rehabilitation and reintegration of the child when faced with these kind of offenses falls on the JJ Act. And therefore, the JJ Act is core to child rights, core to rehabilitation, and core to a child. Now, the child protection system in India is beautifully interwound and is as follows. I will point out our frontliners, our hotlines, our childline. This organization, Childline India, in collaboration with the government of India, is doing fabulous job on the ground. To quote, they are right now during the pandemic on the ground, irrespective of the fact that they might be facing the virus. They have been going about taking calls. They are 24-line hotline. They take calls. They are reacting. They are collaborating with the police, with other entities, and ensuring that children are being are safe, children are being heard, and children can reach out for help. The Act, JJ Act, very clearly articulates a special juvenile police unit in every district of the country. And every police station is now has to identify one police officer as a child protection officer who's been trained to handle children, to interact with children, and also has in-depth knowledge of child rights and the JJ Act. Now, when children face any kind of abuse or trauma, the two judiciary bodies that support with reintegration and rehabilitation is the Child Welfare Committee and the Juvenile Justice Board. The Child Welfare Committee, of which I'm a part of, is a 5-bench committee that has quasi-judicial powers and looks into cases where children face abuse. This is also available in every district of the country. The Juvenile Justice Board is the board where children who have committed instances that constitute as illegal and is criminalized in the adult criminal justice system. And they are produced before this 3-bench board comprising of one member who is a sitting judge. Now, when a child is rescued, or what does a citizen of this country does, what do they do is they can reach out either to the police, that's the 100 number, or the child line 1098 number. And when a call is received from these two entities, a child, if needed, is rescued and brought before these two judiciary bodies, and intervention for this child is presented. And the implementation of the orders passed by these two bodies is done by the District Child Protection Unit. Also, the District Child Protection Unit also oversees the running of childcare institutions in that particular district. Now, these children are, if these children need institutional care, the Child Welfare Committee would order that the child can be placed in a child care institution, while a child who comes before the Juvenile Justice Board and needs to be placed in a home is placed in an observation home. These are the mechanisms that are there present in the juvenile system to protect children. But if people need to report and need to make changes, want to suggest some changes and want to see some monitoring system in place, can reach out to the State or National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, which oversees and monitors the implementation of the Juvenile Justice Act and has the powers to make recommendations to the state and the national government. Now, all this together looks fabulous on paper, looks fabulous when I talk about it. The only thing that I feel it lacks is our approach to children. Now, when we talk about children, adults usually look at children as a commodity. They feel that they can make decisions for these children. They feel they can decide what is okay and what is not okay for the children. And I feel child rights can be upheld, child can be protected if we learn to listen to the child's no. And work on a system, work on initiatives, work on policies that ensure that children have an enthusiastic yes. I'm seeing that happening. I'm seeing this play out. Many of them are making changes in the way they approach children. And though it's very minimal, I feel that it could be just a drop in the ocean, but every drop makes the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashika. Very beautifully explained all the rights in in concise, in brief, and because I was teaching child rights and TIS in Guwahati, so I am getting back to what I used to teach my students. Today was a really, really fruitful discussion in terms of getting a global perspective of global perspective of understanding mandated reporting strategies to support children who are neglected and abused, and zeroing into what we do in India and what next, what are the best ways we can implement, what are the best things we can bring about, the best practices. And thank you so much. I think we have exceeded the time, so we don't have time to take questions, but I don't see any questions either. I'm seeing some good comments from the attendees. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Ms. Bharti, thanks a lot for coming to the ECDF platform. Mr. Asif, it was wonderful to have you. And Ms. Ashika, thanks a lot for joining us. And with a note of positivity that we are, finally building a bridge to reach out to children, support them, and give them back the childhood, those children who do not have their childhood, so give it back to them and help them advocate their rights instead of us advocating for them, empower them to do that. Thank you so much. And it's been a wonderful evening, a wonderful talk, and see you soon again with our next ECDF webinar, which is coming up shortly again. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.